Okay. Right. Good evening. I think we've all attendees who are ready to join us have now joined us because the number of attendees is now static. Good evening and welcome. My name is Andrew Dodd. I'm on the committee of the IET Buckinghamshire Network. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, which is being hosted by Cisco. This is actually the last of our lectures in 2020. Obviously, the program this year has been disrupted, though we have held a number of webinars, and in this instance, Cisco very kindly actually running the webinar itself. We do intend, and I'm certainly planning to run lectures in 2021. There'll probably be a mixture, both of webinars and also physical meetings once we're allowed back into our normal venue in High Wycombe and also to the Holiday Inn Aylesbury. We are planning at least one visit, probably from April onwards. Please keep a lookout at the IET Buckinghamshire events list to see what's going on. Nothing will be posted probably now until January. But there will be a mail shot to let you know what the program is. Well, it's my great pleasure to welcome Des O'Connor, who is a Business Development Manager at Cisco. This must be around about the 15th year we've had an annual Cisco lecture. They're always on bleeding edge topics, and it's always nice to hear Cisco's view of how they see the market developing for various parts of IT technology. In this instance, I asked, could we have something about 5G? And Des is going to give us a talk about Open 5G evolution and vRAN. I have actually no idea what vRAN is, so I'm hoping to learn that bit. Although I did actually Google it, and I said, oh, right, okay, I know what the acronym means, but other than that, it's now over to you, Des, and thank you very much indeed for agreeing to give this evening's talk. Oh, sorry, I should say, I do beg your pardon, Des. For those joining, there is a chat sidebar, and certainly at the bottom of my screen, there's also a Q&A thing. So if you want to ask questions, just put them up. I think Des and I will both see them, and I'll keep an eye on the chat sidebar. And I apologise, Des. Now over to you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to my esteemed colleagues here. Thank you so much. And I guess I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing that I don't have to travel to wherever it was I was going to travel to. It's kind of nice in my comfy little living room, to be honest. So I hope I've got some content that's going to be of interest to you. I think it's only about going to be cover around 3/4 of an hour of your time, and then we can have some Q&A afterwards. So what I wanted to talk to you about is kind of a Cisco perspective on what's happening in the kind of era of 5G, what's kind of changing, how we think it's affecting architectures, and not just the architectures of parts of the networks that are traditionally within the Cisco domain, for example, mobile calls and transport, etc., but also areas that haven't been traditionally in our domain, things like open virtual radios or vRAN, as I've listed it here. So we'll cover a few areas around that. Right, let's move it on. So everybody tends to have one of these slides, don't they, which kind of shows the evolution from 2G through to 5G, so I'm going to be no different. I guess what I'd like to point out is, particularly in the era of 5G, we're seeing everything become software. So where radios where mobile operator networks used to be built around a combination of appliances, radio appliances, core appliances, etc. At this point now, it is becoming all software, and it kind of started, I guess, in the IT domain. Then it hit the mobile core of the network, and now it's actually impacting the radio as well. It's been a long evolution to get there, driven in the main by by mobile operators actually, rather than by the vendors. The nature of 3GPP and how voting rights work made it difficult for some of them changes to kind of happen over time in 3GPP. So we saw lots of other standards bodies picking up some of the slack with a much greater element of operator voting control, things like the ORAN Alliance, where things have happened on the radio side of things which hadn't happened before. So things are getting bigger, they're scaling more devices will come onto the network, obviously, and more throughput is being derived by each of them devices over time. There's much more spectrum being allocated in all bands, kind of low, mid and high bands of the kind of spectrum area. In the UK particularly, I think there's some coming at low band at 700 megahertz. And then there's some assigned in the mid band as well, and not that much yet really in the high bands. But in the US, for example, there is a lot of high band radio and spectral assignment. Not only is spectrum being assigned more of and at higher frequencies and at wider lumps of bandwidth, but the methodologies for gaining access to spectrum are changing over time. And in the US, we see things like CBRS, which is a method of sharing spectrum, a particular lump of spectrum at 3.5 gigahertz in the United States. Here in the UK, we've had various moves by Ofcom to kind of liberalise access to spectral licensing to some extent, so you can get it on a local basis or on a shared basis at a much more reduced cost if you're a small operator or a small enterprise, for example, rather than the traditional model where the only ones who could afford to buy it would be mobile operators, and that's because they could buy it at a national level and acquire it for that whole national coverage. Now it can be more regional as well. So changes in all areas. So in business models as well, we're starting to see, with these new types of technologies, which can allow a far more automated and fast build of the network, then we can see business models can start to change as well. And we'll get into that a little bit more a bit later. So although the network is changing and it's starting to look different, there's a lot of inertia against change, and by that I mean, even if you look at the standards, things like 5G NSA, the networks can still look relatively similar. By the time we get to 5G SA, thinking does start to be radically different. So the boxes look a bit different. The way they interface together starts to look different. And that then enables new opportunities and new business models, etc. So it's not a done deal that even when the technology will change to things like the 5G SA architecture, which I'm not going to focus on today particularly, even though them architectures change, the methods and modes of operation within service providers has to change too, and so you won't really leverage some of the benefits, I don't think, as operators, unless you're moving your organisational processes and people and service models on at the same time as well, and we're seeing that around the world. We're seeing operators are starting to think differently about how they consume technology, whether it's open sourced or more traditional stuff. How they manage vendors contractually. Everything is changing slightly, but clearly from a mobile operator's point of view, they still have to build an absolutely solid network with all the right amount of nines that deliver a highly scalable and available network. So, and they've spent many years building all these processes and techniques from the operations point of view, including the kind of design test and deployment methods that have made that process viable. So it's not that easy for them to throw all of that away and try and do something different. But we're starting to see some of them efforts happening. So right now, because everything is becoming software and it's parts and the network is starting to run on computers rather than on very bespoke pieces of kit, we're starting to see technology living partly on computers owned by service providers, but actually what we're starting to see now is certain parts of the computing infrastructure that comprises the network sitting in public clouds or at least in hybrid clouds. So, and you start to see vendors like Cisco and others designing, developing and deploying some of our technology and function into the market in this kind of as a service model, which is what you'd typically see from a web scaler in a public cloud, for example. So we have private telco clouds. They're moving from the central data centers. They're kind of slowly edging their way closer to the edge. So in mobile terms, that means closer to the cell sites. There's quite a lot of cell sites, though, so don't expect to see large compute infrastructures at the cell site because that's probably going to be cost prohibitive. But, you know, closer to them cell sites at edge aggregation centers, we're starting to see some of that happening now around the world. So what's the goal for this new network that looks so radically different? Oh, and by the way, this network has to sit alongside everything that the service provider has already built. So in case you think their life wasn't difficult enough already, they've got to manage, you know, a pretty complicated migration from the traditional types of network to these new types of architectural constructs. So to some extent, we've seen a lot of this stuff happen first in greenfield sites. So whether they're places like Rakuten in Japan or one or two others that we've been involved in, it's kind of easier to start there because they can build the whole thing from ground up to look like this, and it's more of a journey, I think, for large incumbent operators that we might call brownfield. So some of the goals of building a network this way, obviously, is CapEx and OpEx reduction, providing further efficiencies, and we'll do that various ways by opening up the ecosystem, breaking the technology down into software functions, achieving scale and speed and agility to roll out is a very important goal as well, and trying to get. I don't think we quite get to zero touch operations anytime soon, but we're getting to a far less touch point set of operations as we're managing the builds and the deployments of these networks over time. We've already got some examples of completely in the cloud core services. Cisco spun out with another mobile operator, a public cloud-based mobile core a couple of years ago called Working Group 2. Now that is an example of an entirely web scale looking network. It's got things like a cloud mobile core with all the surrounding bits and pieces, the customer database, the messaging systems, etc. But designed ground up cloud native. So it's designed, built, and operated in a very different way. So they have a relatively small team of people, and they, as they design and develop this kind of CI/CD process, continuous integration, continuous delivery, they're constantly moving pieces of code into this new network at quite a fast rate, and it's built in the cloud as a service, so it can be offered all over the world relatively quickly to any operator. So whether it's a greenfield operator or an MVNO, or frankly even an incumbent operator who thinks he might be able to move the market a little bit in his favour by deploying some of these innovative services, That's kind of one of the things that we're starting to see change. And so a very API-driven network that once connected to the radios can then offer a certain amount of differentiation and speed of change that these can be sometimes more difficult to achieve in traditional network builds. So let's look at the RAN, or the radio access network. That is transforming slowly as well. As I said earlier, that's driven by the operators in the first instance. We've now seen the radio changing in numerous ways. So first of all, from a standards point of view, there's something called new radio, which is the latest 5G specification for how radios work. Radios are decomposed now into typically 3 units: the RU, which is the radio unit, the DU, distributed unit, and the CU, which is the centralized unit. So they're split, and then they're also typically running on compute. As you get closer to the radio, that compute has to be a little bit more special. But over time, we're seeing that compute is kind of growing its capabilities to be able to even achieve some of the more difficult to achieve functions using FPGAs, etc. in the compute forest closest to the edge. But that's kind of happening over time, and we're seeing evolutions from chipsets from kind of Qualcomm and Intel, etc. that will kind of make that journey happen over time. But it's certainly not exactly there yet, but we're certainly on that journey, and we've seen the first examples of these distributed and decomposed radios appearing in the market now. And we're also seeing, many operators, including, I think pretty much all of the operators in the UK market, starting to experiment with releasing RFIs, RFQs, and making public announcements around virtualized radio or open radios as well. So these are software centric. You can essentially, in theory, have a different vendor for your RU, to your DU, to your CU. It won't start like that, but that's how this ecosystem will grow over time. I think one other important point to make is this stuff really needs to be automated from pretty much the ground up and be secured from the ground up from a design point of view, because there's quite a lot more threat surfaces as you look at how we've opened up these radios, which need to be addressed. And they're so complicated, to be honest. It needs to be kind of press button, and the successes we've seen in the market so far have achieved the deployment of these radios with pretty much press button operation in terms of from a deployment perspective. So there's just a little bit more detail of what's happening to the radio. It used to be called an E node B or a G node B, which is a kind of black box, I guess, and you can't get at the stuff in the middle of it. And that's kind of changing now into these functional software entities like the RU, DU, and CU. And depending on the split and where them functions sit in the network, then you have more onerous requirements, for example, on the transport and the distance between these nodes than you would typically if it was just a solid kind of black box. And so you have different splits that can that will have different requirements. So the functions decompose east-west, and then of course north-south. Then we're seeing that disaggregation because it's now just pure software sitting on commercial off-the-shelf compute, whether that's kind of XMNO-based systems or more kind of cloud-native Kubernetes type stacks, which is what we're starting to see a little bit more of now. So what this means is because this is broken up a little bit, we're starting to see a larger ecosystem of vendors grow, which I think is essentially one of the key things the operator community were trying to achieve by breaking this up and allowing for specialization. I mean, even in the CU itself, there can be sub-specialization in there where you can have different vendors supply slightly different parts of it. By doing that, we're widening the ecosystem up to more vendors, and we're expecting to see innovation and accelerated innovation happen. The kind of barrier to entry is reducing slowly over time. The space now in the market for systems integrators who are specialising in putting all of these different functions together. So the kind of market dynamics for the space looks a little bit different than it did a few years ago. Right now, I think if operators are betting money on what they're going to build their macro infrastructure on, typically they're still looking at the big radio vendors, as this is driving towards prime time. Not quite there yet, but you know, we're starting to see even brownfield operators deploying technology like this at the edges of their network at some experimental cases, maybe in remote rural areas or in some very specific, maybe indoor scenarios. So that's how we're going to see it move along over time. So how are we achieving these sorts of benefits? Because it's not really that easy to do this. And in fact, when we first saw Open vRAN, Open Virtualized Radios as a concept, there was a lot of people saying it's an even 50-50 bet at best, and whether this really will kick off and whether this ecosystem will thrive and flourish. I think we're past that point now where I think most people are saying it will flourish, and so the kind of ecosystems have been built. Several of, I mean, many vendors have grouped together bunches of sub-vendors to achieve this kind of ecosystem approach. They can work together to derive, blueprints, for example. So, we build out labs, and them labs will be full of a suite of functional components from a variety of vendors, and then we'll do the kind of deep integration, testing of them interfaces, and validation of the functionality that we expect. So then that gives us the resolution, I guess, to be able to stand behind this in a much more strong way, and for the service providers themselves to be able to stand behind it as well. Because as long as service providers are still saying, I need one throat to choke, I need to have end to end across this entire network, then some of the costs will remain in some of these solutions. The costs can start to drop away as people become more comfortable that the systems are solid and robust, and then we expect to see risk moving from the vendor and the system integrator community probably into the operator community. But again, that's a journey that has to happen over time as well. So we also see kind of some of these operational efficiencies. I think we talked earlier about operational models like CI/CD. There's a whole new suite of tools that comes with these software-based networks, which are very familiar to IT and web-scale players, but maybe less familiar to the traditional telco design and deployment engineers. But they're getting on board with it fast, I think, so that they're becoming more familiar with these tools, their limitations, and how to operate them. Okay, let's move on a little bit. So how is Cisco approaching this? Well, we look at it both from an end-to-end solution perspective and then from a subsystem perspective. And what we're trying to do in the market is we leverage our core competencies, which are around IP, virtualization, cloud and telco cloud technology, as well as mobility and core and security. We do a lot of work with partners, so we've got quite a good capability in terms of working through multi-vendor interoperability scenarios and performing integration roles. So developing out solutions and systems architectures that, as I said earlier, we can then take into the market is something that we can do, as well as the kind of the business development side, which is what I'm trying to do some of. The ecosystem that we built is changing. To be honest, it's relatively fluid. It's changing all the time. Some of the vendors that currently we're working with are listed there in the bottom right. And you know, what you'll see there is that they're not all doing the same stuff. You know, some of them will be focused on SI, some will be on antennas or RU technology, others will be on the CU or on just the software stack in general. And then there's the likes of Cisco, who've got things like the telco cloud, the transport infrastructure, the security technology, and some of the automation. So you know, we can bring all of these things into these labs and start figuring out what do we need to do to accelerate that transformation. And again, typically that will start looking at things like labs, blueprints, and validation. And we're doing that both on the consumer and on the enterprise or private LTE and 5G scenarios. And we're trying to look at it across both greenfield and brownfield scenarios as well. For us, optionality is kind of important. You know, when we build these kind of blueprint architectures, then what we're doing is we'll build this in that lab, and then we'll have all sorts of optionality in it around taking out certain functions and putting other functions in, testing them, performing integrations there, and then moving on to the next one as well. Some of the key areas are obviously on the X-Hall for Cisco. There's bespoke, and there's the specific pieces of kit now from a routing point of view that we're applying to the frontal deployments. Kit that can deal specifically with the new timing requirements and sync requirements of these radios when they're disaggregated in a certain mode. Yeah, so there's a portfolio there. There's the telco cloud portfolio itself, as well as things like mobile core, etc. as well. So on the customer side, we're running POCs and trials. We've been doing some deployments. We did one of the world's first large-scale greenfield deployments over in Japan, and working through these kind of architectures and building even financial modeling. So in some places in Northern Europe, we spent quite a long time, 3 months, 4 months, working through financial modeling to kind of say, well, how does that break even? When does this technology look like it's going to hit prime time from a cost perspective? So we're working on all of them areas. This is an example of one of the labs that we've built. In this lab, you can see quite some optionality there on the radio side already. We've got a cloud core on the right-hand side. We've got systems integrators over in the US, like Worldwide Technology. In Europe, NEC are standing up and stepping into the kind of SI role. And so, depending on the market and the region, we're building more of these labs with different sets of vendors. So this is the thing that we think is going to start building the confidence and accelerate the capability as we carry on. I said earlier, it's not that easy to kind of build these new networks in the kind of architectural constructs that I've shown. And what we've noticed is there's certain types of players in the market and certain behaviours, I guess, that are going that drive the kind of leading edge of this stuff. And I've listed here some of the things that we've seen in terms of how this stuff's happening. right from CXO focus in the operator domain to focusing on strong cost positioning, driving the vendors from an economic perspective, as well as business models. So we're starting to see people building new business to business opportunities now with what today is, I think, theoretical click to order scenarios for 4G and 5G, but will be in the very near future not theoretical but real kind of click to order architectures. It's something that we already see in Wi-Fi as we sell Wi-Fi into businesses, and it's something that we're now seeing happening in the ecosystem particularly for private 4G and 5G. There's definitely a change in culture. Some of the companies that we've seen start up entirely new, they're looking at these kind of DevOps environments right from the very start. Other operators have taken a more evolutionary approach to it. But these things are pretty key, I guess, to kind of, you're going to measure your time to whatever your definition of success is going to be significantly impacted by these kind of cultures and capabilities that you're producing in the operator domain. And as I said earlier, ecosystem is very important. So people who are looking at how to build out these ecosystems and find partners who are willing to share risk, particularly sharing risk, they're the ones who I think are going to take the steps forward first. And then the risk-averse companies will be the fast followers and the followers as they've seen the risk go out of the thing, they've seen the price come down because the risk's gone out, and then we'll see more of them following. So that's a quick perspective from our point of view on some of the market success criteria. There's a few examples of operators who, there's many more of these, by the way, but I'll just call out a few that we've seen and worked with specifically in the past. Timo over in the US, this is rather than some of the European operators. They've gone at low frequency and they've deployed a 5G, a quite early 5G SA core. That means 5G standalone core. So this is the very new architectural construct where the network looks very different than the traditional evolutions of 2 to 4G, I guess. And they've also differentiated on the business side, obviously, with their price bundles and the speeds. And actually, the speed that they're pushing offers out in the market. Obviously, on the brand side, they have the Un-carrier brand, which they use to try and differentiate as well. Who else would I talk about? So I actually worked over in India for a while with the Geo brand. So I think the unique thing there was they built a 4G only network in a world where everything else was still 2 to 4G, meaning that then every other network had circuit switch fallback as a method of delivering voice, and Geo chose to avoid an awful lot of that technology complexity, which is both a pain and also a benefit, I guess, over time. They're also very innovative on their tariffs. They launched pretty much for free for quite some time, which allowed them to achieve phenomenal customer growth in the short term. Heavily automated. They've built quite a significant ecosystem, and in fact, so not only did they innovate themselves on the radio technology, but they also brought in new handsets into their market at the sorts of price point that they needed to operate in India. And I think most people at this point have heard about what Tarek and his colleagues have done in Japan with Rakuten. They've got significant differentiation there on pricing, and they've built their network as a kind of web scaler type network in the first place. So it's not, they don't look like a traditional telco team as they've built up that team. They're more into kind of CI/CD and software development. So that's a 100% virtualized radio access network. It's very different to the typical networks that you see have been operating in recent times. It's probably already to some extent dating because the technology is moving fast. So we can see how that Rakuten mobile network and the platform around it is evolving very quickly into a consistently new model, and actually they're trying to take that model to market elsewhere as well. So that's all I've got for you. I've got plenty of time for questions, and that's just a very quick perspective from Cisco's side. I'll leave it open to questions now. I don't know how we want to do that, Andrew. If we've got any in the Q&A, or if
yeah, okay. Well, I suspect the excuse me. I suspect the best way is if we use the chat sidebar. If everybody can see that.
We could do on this one. Then hopefully again. And if you have a question, then you should be able to either put a chat into or Q&A into the question panels, or you should also be able to raise your hand, and we should see that. Okay.
Well, chat is probably quite nice. If you can see the chat box, I've actually sent out a message to everybody just welcoming them to the meeting at the start. Make sure you select to everyone, then we can all see the questions that are being asked. A whole load of options, but if you just click on where it says to and just click on everyone, then we'll see it. If anybody can't see that, if they send an email to me, andrew.dodd@ietvolunteer.org, and then I'll be able to see it and pass it on. So if anybody, you can't see the chat bar. Desmond, Des, I'll just kick off. It's just striking me hearing your presentation that, in effect, that this is looking for a world where almost all connectivity is via radio, I believe, if I've understood correctly. Is that how you see it?
No, I think I've focused this presentation on 5G, which is, by definition, relatively associated with radio. But actually, one of the first slides I presented showed a convergence happening. At the end of the day, the kind of de-appliancing is happening in the fixed line world as well to some extent. And so, when everything just becomes a microservice piece of code, then that's equally applicable for the BNGs and the kind of some of the kind of fixed broadband capabilities as it is for mobile as well. So I think there's certainly, at least from Cisco's perspective, we're looking at a convergence, at least at the core. And clearly, from a transport perspective, a lot of the segment routing technology, a lot of things that are happening in routing and switching are equally pertinent, whether that's transporting front, mid, and backhaul for mobile, or whether it's transporting traditional kind of circuits for fixed line.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you. And there's a question in the question panel from Matthew as well. Thank you, Matthew, for the question. Can you see that, Des, or do you want to read it out?
Let me have a look.
Oh, yes. Okay. You're right. Sorry, I hadn't picked on that. The question is there a strong likelihood of 2 tiers of 5G, given that most Western countries are looking to ban Huawei-based products, although Huawei are known to have some of the most advanced kit? So that's the question. Is there a strong likelihood of 2 tiers of 5G? And I have to say that question has gone partly through my mind as well. You can see you've got the US block, and we will Cisco obviously within that, and Chinese influenced spheres of operation, and I think we can include Africa in that, sort of squaring off to each other on these provisions. Anyway, what do you think, Des?
Well, who knows? That might all change again very, very swiftly with the new Biden thing. Who knows? But you know, I don't know. I think Huawei are very late to the Open vRAN discussion, but then again, they are more. But they have built some fantastic radio technology over time, which has been very painful, I think, for many of the operators around the world who are being asked to pull this stuff out. You know, if we had a massive ecosystem of alternatives at the right price point, at the right quality, delivering on exactly the same, you know, megabits per second per pound per lump of power, then you know, this will be a little bit more easier. But the truth is, Huawei coming out has caused some really detrimental effects to some operations, I think, and it does put some countries on the back foot for a while. But I think in the long term, the world will be better. You know, whether Huawei remain out or not, I think having things that it is giving some sort of momentum towards the disaggregation and opening up of networks. And so I think that can only be a good thing from a pure innovation ecosystem perspective.
Mm. Well, certainly it'll be interesting to see how that goes forward if and when the American presidency change and their view going forward on how Huawei are involved. We've got a question on the chat line from Philip Rushton. When do you see 5G SA being generally available, please?
So Cisco have launched one already. We've launched one in the United States. It's I think from our point of view, it's there in the cloud. It's been offered as a service. It's big. Doesn't scale. Our first instantiation of that is designed for large operators. So I think within the next 6 months we're going to see them things scaling down more, so that they can address the very small scale as well. And in fact, to some extent, I'm sure there are open source and other vendors that are already offering instances of SA. But there's quite a lot of features and functionality there, and you know, it's one thing kind of saying let's look at the 3GP specification and what something does, but there's quite a legacy of functionality, for example, in the kind of core control plane and the user plane functions that have been developed over many years from companies like Cisco and Nokia, etc. That you know, are being redeveloped into the kind of cloud native formats as we speak. But we won't need all of that functionality for each use case. So 5G is definitely addressing more use cases than the traditional set of use cases from previous generations. And so a lot of the technology that you'd need to be a very large mobile operator selling services to consumers with all the legal and regulatory constraints in and around that are not necessarily all going to be there on some of the other use cases like private 5G.
Great, thanks, Des. Questions in the chat. One from Samuel, thank you. What impact will the entry of the hyperscalers, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, AWS, Oracle Cloud, IBM Cloud, into the telco ecosystem have on the 5G network in terms of competition?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, they're definitely going to. I don't hear a lot of discussion from operators as much now talking about OTT and eating our lunch, etc. I think there's a symbiosis has formed at this point where mobile operators are going to start embracing the capabilities and the credibility and the credentials from some of these web scalers to enhance their service offerings. Now, whether that's putting technology in at the edge, edge apps, for example, or whether it's leveraging their kind of central data center clouds for scaling. I think that's just going to change over time, but I think we're in a hybrid world already. At least the networks that we're designing and deploying are already to some extent hybridized. We've got technology sitting in probably most of the networks that you've mentioned there, and we expect to see more and more of that technology there. So it's going to be a hybrid world, and will it become an entirely public cloud world? I'm not convinced. That's where we end up, but we're certainly going to take the best of breed from all of the things that these guys bring to the table.
All right, thanks, Des. And one more question also from Daniel. What role will TDM passive optical networks play in the transport part of the 5G network?
Yeah, I'm not actually an optical expert, if I'm honest, so I'm not sure I'm going to do justice to that one. Well, what I can say is the kind of the layering of technology at the optical level and then at the kind of IP level is that model is it's possible to change that model now, and we're seeing technology and advancements in optical interfaces that mean that we can remove the optical component from a lot of these service cabinets and have it running purely IP.
Okay, I think that's all we have on the questions. If anybody has any others, if you'd like to post them into the chat or the Q&A panel.
I think seems that we haven't got any more questions coming in. Certainly, on the chat line, Mike, I'm not seeing any more coming in, but I didn't see the last couple of questions, so my chat panel seems to have frozen about 2 questions ago.
Okay, yeah, there's no more for after that last one from Simon.
No. Okay.
Maybe you want to close.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, Des, thank you very much indeed for giving us tonight's talk on 5G and vRAN. You have sent me the slides, and in the next 24 hours or so, I will send them out to everybody who's joined in on the call. I will just check in a moment. I have actually captured all the participants. But Des, thank you very much indeed for taking the time out from your evening to present, and for adding to the long line of previous speakers from Cisco who've told us the many changes that have happened over the last few years. It will be interesting to see how 5G develops. One's always cautious, obviously, on new developments like this because they get awfully hyped. It's going to solve all our problems, and it never quite does as well as it's done. But it will be interesting to see what the advent of low latency will do for services, and how other technologies react to that low latency. Certainly I'm aware when looking at video over the internet that I watch certain things with my daughter who's not in the household, and sometimes it can be up to 15 seconds of drift between what I'm seeing and what she's seeing. And that can be quite aggravating if you're saying, oh, look at what's just happened. And my daughter says, oh, what is happening? So it'll be interesting to see how some of the OTT and other things actually respond to that, because there is a deal to be done there. So with that, I think we'll close tonight. Thank you, Des, and thank you, everybody, for joining in. And as I said, I will send out the slides in the next 24 hours. And Mike, Hetherington, thank you very much indeed for setting up the WebEx call and for acting as the overall host for this evening.
You're welcome. Yeah, and just one final question or comment from Matthew. Thank you. Good presentation yourself. So yeah, thank you, and my thanks, Des. Good session.
Thanks, Owen.
Okay, lovely. So good night, everybody, and thank you for joining in.